700 feet beneath the New Mexico desert, 6 people stood in a place no human being had ever seen. It was October 2019. The air was heavy, warm, and laced with a strange metallic smell, the scent of deep earth, of rock that had never known sunlight. Max Wishock led the team. Alongside him were Andy Armstrong, Hazel Barton, James Hunter, Beth Courtwright, and Shaw Thomas. All experienced cave explorers, all carefully selected for a rare mission inside Lechuguilla Cave. Lechuguilla is one of the most extraordinary cave systems on Earth, a vast underground labyrinth beneath Carlsbad Caverns National Park. More than 140 miles of passage had already been mapped there, but some sections had remained off-limits. Not because no one could reach them, because they were considered too pristine, too fragile, and too scientifically valuable to risk contaminating. To reach the area they'd been authorized to explore, the team first had to cross a body of water called the Lake of Liquid Sky. It had been discovered in 1993. For 26 years, it had stopped every expedition cold. Wishock's team was the first ever given permission to cross it, and the condition was absolute. No human skin could touch the water. So they didn't use wetsuits. They didn't wear standard caving gear. They suited up in full-body protective coveralls designed for nuclear reactor environments. Then they stepped into the lake. Slowly, deliberately, carefully. It stretched about 50 feet across. In places, the water reached 5 feet deep. Its surface was so still, so clear, that it reflected the cave ceiling like polished glass. That is how it got its name. Standing at the edge, you weren't looking at a lake. You were looking at liquid sky. And on the other side was a passage sealed away from the world for hundreds of thousands of years. To understand why this place matters, you have to understand where it came from. Around 265 million years ago, this entire region lay beneath a shallow inland sea. Around that sea grew a massive reef, not coral in the modern sense, but a barrier built by sponges, algae, and marine organisms over immense spans of time. Then the sea began to die. The water grew saltier. The reef organisms perished. Their remains compressed into limestone, and the whole formation was eventually buried beneath layers of mineral-rich rock. Then, millions of years later, something began to eat through it from below. Hydrogen sulfide gas rising from deep petroleum deposits met groundwater trapped inside the limestone. The reaction produced sulfuric acid, and that acid began dissolving the rock from the inside out. The caves of the Guadalupe Mountains were not carved mainly by rivers flowing downward. They were digested by chemistry, hollowed from below like a cavity forming inside a tooth. That process created cave chambers unlike anything found in most other cave systems on Earth. Spaces decorated with rare crystals, bizarre mineral formations, and microbial life adapted to total darkness. The cave system first entered public awareness in 1898, when a young cowboy named Jim White saw what looked like a column of smoke rising from the desert. He rode toward it, thinking it might be wildfire. It wasn't smoke. It was bats. Hundreds of thousands, possibly a million, spiraling out of a hole in the earth. White eventually descended into what became famous as Carlsbad Cavern, helping introduce the world to one of the great cave systems in North America. But Lechuguilla remained hidden. For much of the 20th century, it was dismissed as an unremarkable pit in a remote part of the park. Then cavers noticed something strange. At the bottom of the entrance shaft, air roared through a choke of broken rock. Not a breeze, a roar. And air moves because it has somewhere to go. A small cave doesn't breathe like that. Something massive was down there. In 1986, after years of effort, cavers broke through the rubble, and the cave opened. Lechuguilla was not a minor hole in the ground. It was an underground empire, eventually mapped to more than 150 miles of passage and more than 1,600 feet deep. The second deepest limestone cave in the United States, one of the longest, and by almost any geological standard, one of the strangest and most beautiful caves ever discovered. Sir David Attenborough once entered one of its chambers, the Chandelier Ballroom, and called it the most bizarre cave chamber in the world. Which brings us back to October 2019 and the lake of liquid sky. Wishok's team stood at the edge of the water. Their instructions were simple and unforgiving. No skin contact, no accidental contamination, no mistakes that could compromise a sealed environment that had taken immense spans of time to form. So they entered the lake one by one. The silence was almost total. Just the faint displacement of water against their suits, the echo of breath, the slow push of boots through submerged stone. On the far side, they climbed out onto rock that had never felt the weight of a human footstep. They had crossed into uncharted territory. Beyond the lake, the team entered about 350 feet of pristine, decorated passage. Every surface seemed ornamented. Mineral growths covered the walls in undisturbed perfection, shaped by darkness, chemistry, and time. The team began surveying immediately, using digital cave mapping instruments, notebooks, and hand-drawn sketches to document the new passage. Then they found the crystals. Barite, barium sulfate, in delicate formations unlike anything previously documented in that part of Lechuguilla. Some were pale blue, others soft yellow. Under the beam of a headlamp, they flashed back light in faint prismatic glints. Wishok later named the passage Barite Boulevard. It was a significant mineralogical discovery, but it wasn't the strangest thing they found. Tucked into a low alcove deeper inside the passage, the team discovered a small pool, about 1 foot by 2 feet and only a few inches deep. When their lights hit it, the water looked thick and opaque, almost like lime yogurt. That image would later spread through news coverage and capture the public imagination. But the appearance was deceptive. The water wasn't cloudy at all. It was crystal clear. What made it look milky was an optical illusion, light reflecting off the pale, barite-encrusted rock beneath and around the pool, bouncing back through the shallow water. What made the pool extraordinary was not how it looked, it was what it represented. This water had likely begun as rain on the desert surface, then filtered slowly through layers of rock over immense spans of time before settling in that tiny basin deep underground. By the time it arrived, it had been stripped of virtually all outside contamination. No sunlight, no surface life, no casual contact with the modern world. A sealed environment, a tiny time capsule. For scientists, that matters because such pools may preserve native microbial life, organisms adapted to survive on minerals and darkness in near-total isolation. Not untouched because no one cared. Untouched because everyone involved understood how easily it could be ruined. The team documented the pool carefully, and then they left it exactly as they found it. Wishok and his team spent 8 days underground. 8 days mapping, documenting, and photographing spaces that had existed in silence since long before human history. When they emerged, they brought back data that added more than 4,000 feet of newly mapped passage and pushed the known length of Lechuguilla past 150 miles. The discoveries included pristine barite formations, previously unseen passage, and one of the most remarkable isolated pools ever documented in the cave. But the most striking part of the story isn't the crystals. It isn't the depth. It isn't even the age of the water. It's the restraint. Wishok's team wore full protective suits to cross a lake, not because the water was dangerous to them, but because they were dangerous to it. They moved slowly enough not to disturb what had been preserved in darkness for hundreds of thousands of years. They found a pool of astonishing purity, documented it, and walked away without taking a single drop. In a world that has strip-mined mountains, drained aquifers, and paved-over ecosystems, 6 people went deep beneath the desert and chose not to conquer anything, not to extract, not to claim, only to witness. Somewhere beneath New Mexico, in absolute silence, those barite crystals are still growing. That pool is still sitting undisturbed. And miles of passage no human has ever entered are still waiting. Or perhaps not waiting at all. The cave doesn't need us, but every now and then, we need places like this, to remind us that some of the most valuable things on Earth are the ones we have not ruined yet. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. We make videos about the places, people, and discoveries that reveal just how extraordinary this world still is.